Hey guys, uh, this is the D&D video that I promised that I would make. Um, as you can see, this is not a Google document. This is Photoshop. So I guess I'll just rant a little bit. I'm probably not going to give this much structure. We'll just see how it goes. So I'm doing a battle map for my Saturday game. Actually, let's not go with black. And basically just rant about, prepping a D&D adventure and all that good stuff. So this is for my Sunday game. Yeah, I think that works. This is for my Sunday game. And yeah, nice little gradient there. Yeah, that'll be a nice little backdrop for a gradient. Make a new layer. So basically, I'm gonna draw out this battle map for a boss fight for my Sunday game. And in my Sunday game, just to give you guys a little bit of a backdrop to what's going on in that game, they're going to be facing up against a reincarnated archdevil who has been born into the mortal realm and has been masquerading as a god, pretending to be one, and has been, I guess you could say, enslaving this church. So this is in the basement of a cathedral, and it's basically going to be Thule for my Saturday game, but there's a little bit of ambiguity there. Nobody really, there's an ambiguity as to whether or not this archdevil has been masquerading as Thule and just pretending to be Thule, or if this actually was Thule along and he's an archdevil. A little bit of ambiguity there. Nobody really knows. And neither will you, Saturday players, so do not make any assumptions. I promise you, you may or may not be true. They may not be applicable to your game. So there will be no spoilers for my Saturday game. And this is for my real life players in my Sunday game, which I have converted to Roll20 because of COVID. But yeah, I just wanted to sort of like go through my process. So I've basically taken Nurgle from Warhammer. He is going to be my archdevil template. So he's like an archdemon of like pestilence, and disease. Um, he has been sort of like slicing little parts of his flesh off, and sort of like that's how he sort of indoctrinates the quote unquote priests. By slicing little bits of his flesh off that turn into like little worms that crawl into your ears, sort of like Star Trek Wrath of Khan kind of thing, and sort of convert you into his religion. Thule himself, I'm just going to refer to him as Thule, but don't take that for a grain of salt, Saturday players. May or may not be actual Thule. It's ambiguous. But for the sake of the video, I'm just going to call him Thule. Thule, in visual style, he is sort of like an amalgamation of like John Carpenter's The Thing, mixed with like a Cronenberg monster. This huge mass of globulous like red flesh, sort of like grafted onto a giant throne in the basement of this great cathedral. My players ended their session last week. Going actually into the boss room, which is into the basement, and sort of like seeing this creature. So I'm going to draw the battle map here and hopefully discuss how I'm going to sort of actually, let's stop that. Didn't want to put it there. And how I'm actually going to design this boss. I am using a tablet for this. Usually I have like graph paper or something. I could technically turn on the grid lines for this, but I'm sort of wanting to try and like practice my hand at actual like trying to actually like draw, well, horizontal lines. I can come in here and sort of delete some of this stuff. This will be the entryway that they sort of like came through. Um, there'll be stairs because they came downstairs. Yeah. So what I'm thinking for this boss fight, since it is like an archdevil, sort of like this massive blob of flesh grafted onto the floor and the walls here, I think I'm gonna have some like pillars set up as well. So let me just outline like some of the throne here. Get this sort of watched in. How am I going to do a throne here? Yeah, that looks about right. Not exactly. Not exactly. Perfectly angled. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just. Yeah, that looks about right. And I'll just put some pillars here to fuck with line of sight, and also give the players like some place to sort of like hide behind if they need cover. But the general design I'm thinking for this boss is, I'm thinking that there's going to be flesh sort of like all over the walls, that, and the idea is that this blob of flesh has sort of this archdevil has sort of like grown into the walls here, and sort of like everything is like a growth all across the floor and the walls, and where there is growth of his globulous flesh, it'll be like difficult terrain. And when he's on his turn, if you are on sort of like those masses of flesh, he will be able to make melee attacks against you, and it'll be sort of like the flesh sort of like coming alive beneath your feet and sort of like attacking you. Yeah, that's part of like what I wanted to sort of like do with him. I don't know, very much inspired by, I don't know if any of you guys have ever played the original Fallout 1, the final boss, the Master, and he's sort of like this strange sort of like mutant blob of like vaguely human creature that sort of like grafted himself into sort of like the technology of the overseer's chair, and he's got like these heads up displays sort of like growing out of his spine, and he's really grotesque, and like his body is sort of like strewn about the entire room, just sort of like growing on the walls and stuff. And that's sort of like the visual that I want to go for here, and you guys will see when I sort of like get to that part. Obviously I should probably put on grid lines for future to make this stuff look a little bit more actual, like a room and stuff, rather than just me sort of having to spitball it kind of. But yeah, that's I think that's a good outline of what I want to do here. Another thing is in drawing, when you're sort of, I sort of look at my D&D prep work like I would approach a drawing, which is to say, work the general concepts first. So when you draw, there's a proper way, quote unquote, of drawing. And I don't want to say this to sound like an elitist or any kind of thing like that. There's a proper way to draw in the same sense that there's a proper way to like hold like a stance in like MMA fighting or mixed or any sort of like, you know, combat sport, right? There's a way that you want to stand because it works, it's optimal, it maximizes your chance of hitting the opponent while minimizing the chances that they will hit you, right? You always want to hold your hands like in front of your face because that's a really vulnerable spot, you know, that kind of stuff. There's also, it very much applies to drawing as well, where there's a very sort of optimal way of drawing, just because it not because it's the proper way and that's all great artists work this way. It's more so that it's an efficient way of doing things, and that's to say you work your general idea first, the gesture, right, and it's just this loose like sketch, and there are no details. You can't even tell if the person's male or female, but the one of the things you're trying to capture the energy, the feeling of what you're trying to do, if it's whether it's a person sort of like sitting down or a man in armor holding a weapon. You want to convey some sort of energy or emotion from that pose. And a good gesture is powerful and strong. And when you look at it, you say, well, you might not be able to tell the details of whether this is a male or a female, but you can definitely tell that's definitely a person, and they definitely seem to be holding a weapon in some sort of heroic pose or some intimidating pose. There's a lot of weight to it, or what have you. Um, that stuff is always like really good, and you want to do it that way. You don't want to work the details first. You want to get those general outlines, the gesture in first, because all of the details are going to follow that, and it's going to lay the groundwork for the drawing. And if you have a bad gesture, if you have a bad sketch, it's going to look flat no matter what you do, or not feel alive, especially if you're drawing people. If you're drawing like machinery or something like that, it's a little bit different, right? Because there's a very structured thing to architecture. As you can tell, this does not look very structured, but it is a battle map, so maybe it'll be okay. I probably should work on grid line. I should probably add grid lines, right? But not from now, at least. I don't think so. So this is vague in general, and why do I bring up drawing? Because I never start with like the noodly mechanics, right? I don't know how many hit points this dude has. I don't know specifically what damage his attacks are going to do. I don't know his armor class. It'll probably be something low, right? Because he's this fat glob of flesh. How hard can that be to physically hit, right? But I know the concept, right? This John Carpenter's The Thing, Cronenberg monster, master from Fallout 1, kind of just grotesque blob of massive flesh that's sort of like grown around the walls and the ground here. And that gives me the groundwork to like actually design the feel and what abilities he might actually have, but I'm not going to go into the noodly details, right? So the gesture is knowing what the creature is and what sort of feeling it is. It's like it's this Nurgle, it's this massive blob of flesh, this archdevil that's about pestilence and disease. Obviously, he's probably going to have some disease spells that will make Constitution saving throws, and from there I can sort of extrapolate some mechanics. So I don't want this being to just be another let's go hit the bad guy, and whittle his hit points away, right? I want there to be what am I trying to say here? I want there to be other mechanics at play, right? And so we already know that we're going to sort of, and this is going to be me just sort of like putting out actually, it's a little bit too small. Let's make this a little bigger so I can get some bigger, broader strokes here. So he's obviously on his throne here. And like I said, I'm just trying to get a gesture of a blob of flesh, right? And these are going to sort of be the tendrils of flesh that sort of come out from this person. Probably going to be strewn all up along the line, all the walls here. And then from there, we can just sort of extrapolate and sort of add these tendrils, which we can sort of, as we go along, we'll block all this stuff out and make it a little bit more detailed as we go along. Obviously, like, you know, man, doing these battle maps are a lot of work and stuff, but for a boss fight like this, I think it'll be really cool. And I like doing I like doing battle maps like this. They're a lot of fun. You know, maybe like this is some bad territory right here, right? Like, oh, sort of want you want to get on that. Well, maybe that pillar there be a bad idea because it's covered in this massive globs of flesh. And I'll come back with like a black brush and sort of like detail out sort of like the edges of this to sort of give it mass a little bit later and sort of like add in the details. But like I said, I'm just sort of like, this is the blob of flesh up here, right? And I can sort of detail that stuff. And then I can come in later and zoom in. If you notice down here at the bottom, I've only got this at 25%, which gives me a lot of room to come in and block in details if I want, or whenever I want, which I can do easily. But again, going back to the mechanics, I know that they're going to be like two like big tentacles, and I will make it so that they can only move on sort of like the fleshy bits here. But they will have their own initiative order. And I'm also thinking that to sort of like avoid sort of like in general forcing like doing this thing where the players just beat on the boss until he dies. I'm thinking that all of this flesh is difficult terrain, right? And while it's difficult terrain, it's going to be harder to move around. Well, why is that going to be important? The boss is just up there. Well, sort of like, and I'm just sort of like doing this to sort of like generally block in some of this fleshy stuff. I might come in later and sort of like take a slightly different colored brush and sort of fill some of that stuff in. But in general, the idea here is I want the players to move around, right? If it's just, oh, we just hit the boss or we hit the tentacles until it dies, I feel like there's not a lot of like back and forth there. But I'm going to create mechanics that are going to force the players to move. Well, how do we do that? Well, I mean, think about the Zerg in StarCraft, for those of you who played that game. The Zerg sort of like build their organs on this creep, right? So I'm sort of inspired by that a little bit. So what if this giant flesh-ridden pustule archdevil demigod thing, what if he has external tumorous organs strewn about all these bits of massive flesh sort of like around the room? What about that? Yeah, and say that damaging him, those organs just continue. They've got these black veins sort of like coursing around his body and across these sort of like masses of flesh, these huge tumors that vaguely look like organs. And anytime you hit the main body, all he does is seem to heal up and restore himself. Yeah, and I'll sort of like create tokens and sort of like put them over these areas, but I'm just sort of like generally adding the battle map here. I'll build the tokens later. I did not mean to do that. That was the eraser tool. Yeah, but I have a tablet for this stuff. If you're wondering, I'm not doing this with mouse and keyboard. Yeah, I'll just sort of like, this is something comic books do, where they'll just put an X where they want something to be blacked out. For my own sort of like personal reference, I just sort of like quickly do that to sort of indicate like blocked out areas that I can come back later and sort of like fill in the gaps for. But yeah, I'm definitely thinking there's going to be like these huge external organs, and those are the things that have to be destroyed, right? However, because those external organs are going to be spread out the players are going to have to figure out how to get to them and deal with them, and they're going to have to traverse the difficult terrain to get to them, right? So that's going to be the challenge. And again, I know that this boss is going to have these two tentacles that are going to be trying to reach out and grab people. Well, obviously, I can make it so that whenever their attacks hit, maybe they take like, you know, I don't know, a bunch of bludgeoning damage because they get knocked around by the tendril, and then they become restrained and grappled, so they can't move anymore, right? Which will cause another issue. It's like, oh man, I'm grappled. But we have to get to these tumorous regions to kill them, because that's how the boss needs to be dealt with. I'm not too worried about telegraphing that stuff. I think I can do a pretty good job sort of like ad-libbing it based on like what my players latch onto in the game. But like I said, if they ever decide to just like attack Thule himself, I've got plenty of ideas on how to just sort of describe that his flesh sort of just reforms as these external organs are pumping like liquid back into his body through like the masses of flesh that are strewn about on the ground and the walls and the pillars here. Yeah, and I'm thinking like this boss will mostly do like necrotic and psychic damage, but I haven't sort of determined any of those actual like mechanics or details, right? Or what they entail. There might be sort of an aura of pestilence, where it's like anybody within a 5-foot radius of his main mass up there, like might do some stuff. But I'm not sure, because obviously they're not going to want to stand there for very long. So maybe that doesn't serve the purpose of the boss fight very well. But maybe it also reinforces the idea that, hey, maybe we're not supposed to be standing here. Maybe we're not supposed to be wailing on this guy here. Maybe there's something else that we need to be doing with this boss. The players have full resources, so I can just go kind of crazy with the mechanics here. I know that as a legendary action, I know this boss is going to have legendary actions, right? I know that for a fact. Yeah, and I'm thinking sort of some of these blocked out areas, like here. I think that's good enough for now. I'm going to go back to my black and sort of like do a little bit more detailing. Make this a little bit smaller. Yeah, I'm thinking, let's put this on another layer. I'm thinking that there's an organ like right here, like this blackened liverous tumor that's just sort of living here. And like I said, I can come in later and sort of like block out more of this stuff. So that'll probably be one of them. I'm thinking maybe like one is like right here. And I'll probably color these a different color. And then sort of have like these veins sort of like coming off of them. Yeah. Yeah. Something like that. Anyways, one of the legendary actions I was thinking of giving this guy was that he summons little like head spiders, very much like in John Carpenter's The Thing. Whenever they're dealing with I forget his name, but it's towards the end of the movie where they're giving him he goes into cardiac arrest, and the doc is trying to get him back up, and he's like clear, and then it like bites his hands off, and then they burn him, but the dude's head sort of like comes off and like grows like spider legs. I'm thinking that this guy's massive flesh, like sort of like up on the throne, that's where the spiders are sort of gonna like grow off of like his massive like belly fat, and like all these rolls, like hundreds of these little heads of flesh are gonna sort of like roll off his body. Maybe not hundreds, but like, what's reasonable for a D&D game. And they're going to be the minions of the fight, right? So like he just spawns in like a bunch of these little like head flesh spider things that like maybe do like poison damage, or like when they attack you, there's a chance that you gain this disease that creates these pustules on you. And maybe for the duration you have disadvantage on your attack rolls or something. And if it doesn't get healed in 3 rounds, you explode. The pustules grow and then explode. They deal damage to you, and then everybody like nearby has to make a save as well, or they in turn become diseased from the same thing you just had. Something like that, right? Yeah, I'll put one like right here, I think. And I don't know the ranges here either, but again, like I said, I can sort of detail all that stuff out later, whenever it sort of like comes, when I need it. And then put like a little vein here, and I think it'll be obvious because of how much detail I'm putting into these organs that they're probably important to the fight. Yeah, so we've got 3 organs here. And we probably want to put one. Where would be a cool place to put an organ? Like, yeah, maybe like some sort of thing, sort of like growing off the pillar here. Yeah, that seems like a good idea. Just put that right there, and then we'll have, again, the veins are important, right? And I'll probably paint these things red. Like a pretty simple like red coloring. Yeah, that looks good. I like that. And then maybe just like, I don't want to go too crazy here. I'm going to put one back here, I think. And just this growing pustule over here. Very much like Zerg buildings on creep, right? Like I was going back to that StarCraft analogy. And they have to be dealt with to basically kill this devil. And I'll go back. I'll color these red. Yeah. And how are we doing on time? It's probably a long ass video. Well, we got plenty of time. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So let's go back here. I'm gonna pick up the orange coloring here. Sort of like come back, make this pretty big, sort of fill some of this stuff out. And again, I can fill in these details a little bit later, but I do know that a lot of this stuff is going to be, you know, difficult terrain. I can sort of leave this here like that, sort of like give it a little bit of a suggestion. Bring this in a little bit more here. Yeah, and like I said, I can zoom in anytime I want and sort of like block out a lot of these details. Our throne is sort of like missing here, but I can come back and sort of like put when I'm sort of like detailing it. I just wanted it there for reference. But I can come in and detail a little bit more of that stuff. Like I said, I can sort of leave. Again, it looks a little aesthetically pleasing where I leave little sort of like spots, you know, sort of like suggesting that these are like ropes and sacks of flesh. You know, come in, do some stuff here, sort of like, and the way you sort of like move make your strokes also sort of like give a suggestion of form too, whenever you're drawing another thing to sort of like consider. Yeah, I think that looks pretty tight, actually. One thing I've noticed, and I'm not saying that you have to do this in your games. One thing I've noticed that as an artist, when I sort of like draw these detailed battle maps, players like man, he put a lot of effort into this. Like, that's so cool. Even if it's like not my best work, and trust me, I've done some battle maps I've been personally embarrassed of, but the players always seem to like really get a kick out of them. Like, man, he's putting a lot of effort into this. And I've sort of noticed that when people see that, they sort of like want to put a lot of effort into the game too, because they know that you're working hard to make a really cool game, and they're like, man, you know, Ixon poured his heart and soul into this, so maybe I should too. I like that kind of stuff. Maybe I'm just sort of like, maybe I'm just bullshitting. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. That's quite possible as well. But oftentimes that seems to have been the case whenever I put these things out. And it's like, you know, it's one of those things where you get what you put into it, right? Players will, if players know you're putting in effort, they will too, kind of thing. Just sort of like, maybe not even consciously. I don't like that line. Yeah, but that's the prep work for this guy, right? We've done a lot of prep work, and even with this, it's like, do I even really need legendary actions at this point? Well, maybe I do. I don't know. Let me just do another layer here, and then I'm going to sort of detail out. I didn't mean to. Yeah, I didn't mean to sort of like detail out. I need to sort of like detail. Jesus Christ, I can't talk. I need to detail out, you know, some of these lines, right? Sort of like give the suggestion. Sort of create these really nice sort of varying line weights. I'm actually really pleased with how this is going. And I don't have to outline all of this stuff, right? Just a few lines can sometimes really get the mood you're trying to go. See, like just with a few lines, I've already suggested sort of like how thick and bold this part of the flesh is, and how disgusting it really appears. All right, and then we can sort of like come in here. Overlapping lines always seem like a really easy way to sort of suggest mass and form. I highly recommend that if you're trying to get into drawing, to never ignore overlapping lines to sort of suggest form. It is a powerful tool. And like I said, more varying lines, sort of like creating sort of form. And you see it. Now I'm actually, I think I'm actually going to fill out these veins, because they are supposed to be like black varicose veins. And I will come in later and sort of like add little white highlights to it to sort of like suggest that kind of thing, right? Do that. That. And in fact, I should probably just do that now so I don't forget. Probably doesn't look as good as I want it to. But you get the suggestion that this is a blood vessel. Yeah, that's a little bit too much of a highlight. Especially like right here, I'd say. Let me just sort of follow it suggestively like that. And like a little bit right there. Yeah, something like that. I'm getting a little bit too detailed here. I don't need to be all this detailed. In fact, that's probably like the only time I'm probably going to do something like that. This is probably just good enough. In fact, I could probably just go over this all with like the red, then I'm going to paint all these organs. And that'll probably do the job. See, I'm leaving sort of like the sort of, I'm sort of only like doing it halfway where I would think the highlight would be. Sort of suggest that kind of stuff. Anyways, let's go back to putting in the details here. Like I said, I really enjoy like making these battle maps. They're a lot of fun, creative. I love this kind of stuff. Yeah. And this is a boss fight too. So this is kind of like important stuff. This is very important, and they're sort of like getting close to the end of their campaign. And Thule has been sort of like an overarching sort of theme of the game for a long time here. And again, like you see how I'm sort of like putting these lines in. That naturally sort of suggests like a tendon, doesn't it? I think so. And then I create this that make it sort of like more rounded to give it sort of like the texture of something massive and bigger than what you see here. What I'm doing here is pretty cheap, cheap and easy way to sort of like do a lot of this stuff. But it is a battle map. It's not like I'm trying to draw the next Mona Lisa or anything like that. And people will appreciate all the fine details, which is cool. Yeah. So yeah, I'm thinking, like as an attack, like I said before, mostly necrotic and poison damage and psychic damage too, right? Like I imagine like if you're in an area like this with all these like strange globs of flesh and stuff, I imagine it'd be like really disturbing to see, right? So I imagine like you would be taking psychic damage, and maybe that's part of like being around like any of the organs or the tentacles just naturally deals like 5 psychic damage if you start your turn near them. Just out of principle, your mind is having trouble sort of like not going fucking insane from looking at this shit. I think if I put actual insanity mechanics into the game where it's like, oh, you just lose control of your character and go crazy, I think that'd be a little bit too much. You have to understand there are only 2 players in this game. There are some DM NPCs that will definitely be able to help them out, but I mostly want them to have the agency, right? Let me just sort of come in here and sort of like suggest that these are pillars, right? Like again, like I said, once again, overlapping is a very good way of sort of suggesting sort of form. Like this little overlap here is really good at suggesting that it's curling around the pillar, right? Yeah. This is on some Darkest Dungeon shit, right? That's probably not necessarily a bad thing because that means I'm going. It does what I'm going for here. Yeah, and I really just enjoy like doing this highlight stuff. It's just fun to sort of like let my hand sort of like go and just go where it will. I'm not really even thinking about these lines. I'm just sort of like experimenting and sort of based on like my general experience. Like if something's tapering, use a thinner line. But if something's getting bigger, if I want to suggest sort of mass, I'll do something sort of like thicker like that, right? And over here, I might not even highlight all of it. I mean, that's probably all I need for that, right? This is looking a little flat, so I can just come in, sort of like do like a cross contour line like that, sort of by its nature, sort of like gives it form. Same over here, maybe some. Something like that, yeah. That looks appropriately horrible. There is a lot going on over here in this corner, probably a little bit too much. But I think it's fine. I think it'll be okay. I think it looks cool. So I think that for a D&D game, I think it's good enough. Otherwise, I might want to, if I wanted to spend more time on this, I might go back, refine some of that stuff, maybe get rid of some of those thicker lines and try to do a little bit more suggestion than just like outlining. I think this is coming along pretty well. And again, for the mechanics, like, should it have legendary actions? I don't know. but I can sort of decide in a moment what kind of legendary actions he might have. These, for example, the most obvious one I can think of is wherever the players are standing, if they're nearby some of these masses of flesh, which isn't necessarily going to, which is probably going to come up pretty often based on how much of the stuff is all around, right? If you're near that stuff, well, then you're just going to, he makes a legendary action, you have to make a save, and if you fail it, you take some psychic damage, maybe freak out for one turn for a legendary action. But then again, I can decide on whether or not he has that effect based on how well the players are doing, because I don't know how much overboard is too much. I have a general idea of what they're capable of, but you know, just a few bad dice rolls is all it takes. And based on that, I can sort of adjust the monster on the fly. Sort of like, I feel like sort of like focusing on like his abilities and stuff is now it's better to have ideas rather than just what he does. Like he has these abilities, they do this amount of damage. I don't think that's helpful for what I'm doing here. Yeah, see, I probably should use a little bit of a thicker line here. Yeah. Suggest it. Again here, just suggesting stuff. Yeah. Just, again, sort of suggesting the form here. See how much just putting little lines here can sort of give texture to the drawing. Man, this is looking pretty gnarly, actually. I like it. But I feel like because I didn't concern myself with the details. I was just blocking stuff in and suggesting stuff, and then coming here and then detailing the stuff out later. It gives me a general like perception of what it is I'm trying to do here, and that way I don't get lost in the details, which happens all too often. I feel, and I feel like that can happen in D&D prep work too. You get lost in the details, like, okay, this guy is going to do this, and then that, and then you get married to these ideas because you have them down and suggested them. It gives you very little room to improvise because it's like, well, it's not on the sheet. Well, here I have general ideas of what I know the creature is going to do. Now, I know for a fact there are going to be tentacles. Maybe he's got some signature abilities that I'll probably block out, and no matter what, he's going to be able to do some of that stuff. But I'm never going to get into all the noodly bits. I'm not concerned with his hit points. I'm not concerned about the Oregon's hit points or their armor class. I know it's going to be low because he's a big fat thing that's sort of just sitting there. So it probably shouldn't be a lot of armor. And if it's going to be a lower armor class, that just means I bump the hit points up a little bit more. I know that those little head monsters, those little head spiders, those fleshy head spider things are going to be the minions, and probably going to be a legendary action that he sort of like conjures them up and sort of like pulling them off of his body and they start moving about. And they'll probably do like some poison or necrotic damage, and I'd probably create some sort of pestilence for the player to have to sort of like deal with during the fight, some sort of debuff that probably gives him disadvantage on his attack rolls or maybe some saving throw of some sort. Something for him to think about. Maybe it makes him even harder for him to move around. I don't know. Because, like I said, the whole point of this battle isn't to kill Thule at the top. It's to take out these organs that are supplying him sustenance, right? You have to take out those, and once you do, that's when the body dies, right? He is this amorphous, almost globule thing, right? That's the entire room is the boss, not just what's grafted onto the throne at the top. And the themes of the abilities should complement that. And because I know what that is, it becomes a lot easier to think about what kind of abilities he has. And I'm just spitballing here. I don't know. I can change all that stuff. I've changed a monster's abilities 5 minutes before the session started. I've changed monsters' abilities as the fight started. Sometimes making them more powerful. I'm like, yeah, he should do more here. Primary damage should definitely be like psychic, necrotic, and poison damage. With like general pestilence and stuff. I was thinking about like maybe possible long-term bad side effects, but my players are sort of coming up again into like the end of the campaign. They're dealing with this boss fight because he has a relic they need, and once they get this relic, they'll be able to defeat the King in Yellow, which is this eldritch Lovecraftian horror that's taken control of the surface world and basically bloodborned everything up if you played that game. So like the entire surface world at this moment is like one big sort of like bloodborne nightmare, where the real world has sort of like meshed with the eldritch world. Because one of my players may or may not have messed with an eldritch artifact and destroyed the world. Once again, one of the things that's a little bit more advanced that even I've sort of had to sort of like figure out is varying your line weights can go a long way in suggesting things when you're drawing, which is super mondo helpful. So, like for example, look at that versus something like this. Right? It gives a feel, a quality to what you're trying to do, accomplish. Suggesting things without having to spend a lot of time detailing them out. Little like hints of stuff there. Now that we're doing Thule, we can sort of like zoom in on this area and get a little bit more detail. And I can sort of put in the throne here, but sort of suggest a mass of flesh. Nah, that sucks. One of the benefits of having Photoshop detail, a little bit of a face there maybe. So one of the things I'm noticing here is that it's hard to tell that this is a throne. So I'm going to come in here with some color. Maybe suggest sort of like where his meets does not meet. And I can maybe sort of like come in like this. Maybe sort of make it a little bit more white. Sort of zoom out a little bit. Yeah. Make it white to be a little bit more obvious, because I don't think that's obvious enough. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect, because I'm there and I can just sort of suggest that this is the throne right here. Get some throne stuff here. Here I am getting lost in the details, which is exactly why I do this stuff last. Otherwise, I could be here all day. Not good, not good. That's not the best of thrones, but it's enough where I can sort of like get the idea across. And like I said, I'll be there. I can sort of tell them, hey, this is the throne. It's ambiguous, which it probably will be because this is a terrible drawing. It does definitely, I feel, get the job done. Suggest this with a couple of lines. Maybe sort of darken that a little bit. And then sort of like do a little bit of foreshortening. Just like a little symbol here. To sort of suggest that is the holy symbol of Thule. Sometimes that's all you need is a little bit of like symbolism, and the players will get it, right? It doesn't matter that it's and that's not the best. See what I said about getting caught up in the details? You can make something that really sucks. I think that's good enough. So we still have more work to do here. We've got what we need. However, we need these organs to sort of be what we need them to be. So let's move in here. We just boom. Look at that. That makes that pop out real nice, doesn't it? Makes you really go, oh, what the fuck is that? And we just sort of fill it out like that. And go over here and just fill this out as well. Look at that. Players will get it once they see the outline of that kind of stuff. I think I'm gonna color those pillars just to make those stand out a little bit too. But I can come over here, do the same. And if I wanted to like give it more depth. I could come in with like a highlight, which would make it pop out even more. But not necessary, I don't think. But, yeah. Pull it in. Look at that. That's cool. Yeah. Designing boss fights is a lot of fun. Designing encounters like this, a lot of fun. I don't get to do it too often. But like I said, my Sunday players are sort of like coming up on sort of the tail end of their game. They don't have that many sessions left. They've got this guy, and then they've got the king in yellow, and then they've got one more sort of like, I guess you could say, conflict to resolve. So my fighter in my Sunday game gave his soul to an archdevil for power. And that needs to resolve itself at the tail end of the game. In my Sunday game, I showed like an NPC very early on, like some 7-year-old half-orc girl who really didn't have any sort of purpose in the game beyond just being like, oh, here's some backstory to the thing. Here's some backstory to this dungeon that you're in. She was like this little 7-year-old half-orc girl whose parents were killed by the things that are here. She was going to be like, oh yeah, I never expected them to take her on adventures, train her to be a warrior, and have her become an integral part of the story, but she has. She has since all grown up. She was a 7-year-old half-orc in the game before. But the game has progressed to a point where she is all grown up. She's an adult now. She has Battlemaster power. But she's like part Battlemaster because the fighter who trained her, my PC, my fighter is a Battlemaster, so she has Battlemaster abilities. She's smart because my sorcerer taught her to be cunning. And think intelligently about how to do stuff. So I tried to instill sort of like the characteristics, the best characteristics of both my players, and she embodies both of those things. It's supposed to be like a reflection of those characters, not necessarily like some overpowered DM NPC that I put in the game. It makes sense for her to be there, and she's very much a product of my players. Anyways, like I said, Arngrim, which is the name of the fighter, sort of sold his soul to a devil for more power, and early on wound up killing Tisha because his power got out of control and he lost control and he turned into a demon and turned on the party and killed he knocked down one of the players, the other player, and then killed Tisha when she was still a girl. They were in the Underdark and killed her. And it was a really fucked up moment. It was really sad. But my patron, or the archdevil, Amagog, who is the big bad evil, well, he was the big bad evil. He may or may not wind up being an ally to the party based on the events of Saturday's game. But the original intent was Arngrim's patron in that game, the archdevil Amagog, who gave this power to my fighter, was supposed to be the big bad evil guy of the Saturday game. Yeah, anyways. Amagog comes to Arngrim and says, hey, I can bring her back. And of course, my PC not even batting an eyelash was like, yes, return her, which he did. However, there have been some consequences to that. One of the goddesses that's been I'd say one of the good goddesses that they've sort of befriended and sort of used as an outpost for the game is enemies with Amagog, and he sort of like sabotaged their sort of like home base. That's sort of like been sort of like this, basically like this sort of like survival outpost amidst this like apocalyptic world where eldritch horrors basically control the world. But he sabotaged one of the shrines. That's going to have late game impacts on how all that stuff plays out. And basically, at the very end of the game, for the last fight versus Amagog, because Amagog will turn out to be the final boss. They think it's the King in Yellow, but it won't be. They're going to face off against him at their temple, so at their base. I'm going to have all these NPCs that they've befriended across the campaign join the fight because it'll be at the temple where all these NPCs already are. And he's going to take control of Arngrim's character. I'm going to hand my fighter, Arngrim, Tisha's character sheet, and in the final battle, he's going to play Tisha against his own character. And I think that'll be a really epic, like, final moment. And my player already sort of like knows that he sold his soul to the devil, and he's mostly fucked. So it's not going to come as a surprise to him. But yeah, that's how I imagine all the things going to play out. I think that's a pretty badass looking battle map, you guys. And I think those organs definitely pop on the map. Like I said, I don't know any of the ranges or stuff and stuff like that. I'll sort of determine a lot of that stuff when I import this map into Roll20. And I will have a token. I will have a token here probably set up to sort of represent the like body of Thule, and I'll have tokens for each of the tentacles that'll be moving around here, and all that sort of stuff. But I think that's a badass looking battle map, right? And all those tendrils that you see on the ground there will be considered difficult terrain. Anyways, I think this video has gone on long enough. We're over the hour mark. So I hope you guys enjoyed listening to me rant about D&D, and watch me autistically draw a battle map for it, for the campaign. Let me know what you guys thought. Yeah. Anyways, guys, I'll catch you on the other side. Peace.